What's up guys, welcome back to Kit Guru. So if you are a regular viewer of this channel, you will have probably noticed that it's not very often that we do a standalone review of a fan. There's a couple of reasons for that. It may sound a little boring, just reeling off all the manufacturer's specifications, talking about RGB, maximum airflow rates, maximum fan speeds. Once you've talked about all that stuff, there isn't much to say about a fan. And the other thing as well is to properly test a fan and test its functionality, you really need to do it in lab conditions with expensive and specialist machinery, so we think it's best leaving that to someone like Gamers Nexus that does have that facility. However, Thermaltake has just launched these new SWA fans, and they have a feature that we really want to take a look at because it's quite unique, and we also thought you guys would be very interested in it. So instead of just doing a normal standard standalone review, which could get a bit boring, we've decided to see what these fans are like to use in the real world by doing a build. If you are interested in hearing some specifications, the SWA fans are RGB fans. They have 3 RGB zones and a total of 30 LEDs. The speed range is between 500 to 2000 RPM, and that's the same for the 120 and the 140mm versions. Maximum noise levels of the 120mm version is 36.5 decibels. And the maximum airflow rate, again in the 120mm version, is 54.85 cubic feet per minute. And if you like the look of these fans and you're thinking of buying some yourself, you will be able to buy these from scan.co.uk. They come in 3 packs with a Thermaltake RGB controller, and they're priced at £89. So as I've said already, you can buy the SWA fans in either 120 or 140mm versions. They both come with the Thermaltake RGB controller. I'm going to concentrate on the 120mm version for the purposes of this video. They both look aesthetically the same, except obviously the 140s are bigger. As I said, these only come in 3 packs at the moment. Maybe in the future you might be able to buy them as singles, but for now you get them in a 3-pack. And there is a accessory box inside here. So in there is the RGB controller. There's a bunch of cables, so there's a Molex for power, which is a strange decision, a USB cable, and some others that we'll have a look at when we start installing. And then there's also a bunch of fan screws and a Velcro pad for mounting the RGB controller. Then we take a look at the fans. So they look similar to the Thermaltake RGB fans. There's an RGB ring on this side. The fan blades are kind of an opaque colour, also with RGB lighting. And then on the other side, there's another RGB ring. So if you did install them that way around, you still have some RGB lighting. However, there's no reason to install them that way around because the Thermaltake SWA fans party piece is that you can remove the fan blade. So it just pops out pretty easily, and you can see this one has a black sticker on, and the orientation of the fan blades are just as you'd normally expect. So if you fit it that way around, the blades rotate anti-clockwise and you get airflow pulled in from the front and pushed out the back of the fan. Obviously if you had it installed the other way around, you know, the fan will pull air the opposite way. So the reason I'm showing you that is because inside the box you also get another fan blade. Well, you get another 3 fan blades, 1 for each fan. And you can see this comes with a silver sticker on, and also the orientation of the blades are flipped round. So if you pop that in position, install your fan with this pot facing outwards, the fan again will turn in an anti-clockwise direction, but instead of pulling air in from the front, it actually pulls it in from the back and pushes air out of the front. So what this does basically is it stops you having to change the orientation of the whole frame, whether you want it in a intake or exhaust position. So instead of having to go into your case once your system's built, if you want to change the orientation of the airflow around, you don't have to go into the case, unscrew the fan and potentially unscrew other bits of hardware to get to it, and then swap the fan around. You can just go into the case, pull the fan blade off, so we're switching from an exhaust here, and then pop the new fan blade on without having to take any screws out or doing any other disassembly. So that to me sounds like a really interesting feature. I'm trying to think if I've ever seen this before, and I can't think of any other fan manufacturer that does interchangeable blades. Maybe there is one. Let me know in the comment section if you've seen this before, but it is a first for me, so I do think it's a really interesting feature. And other things on the fan which are pretty standard, it's got anti-vibration mounting rubbers, and then the cable, unfortunately it's not a standard cable, it's a proprietary cable, so it will have to be connected to the Thermaltake RGB controller. Potentially you could mod it maybe to be able to plug it into directly into a motherboard. In the standard configuration it's got to be plugged into the Thermaltake controller. So interesting fans. Like I say, I've not seen this interchangeable fan blade before. I've seen it where you can remove the blade, you can put some lube on the bearing and reassemble it again. In the accessory box, Thermaltake does provide you with some bearing grease, so if you do change the orientation quite regularly, or if you're pulling the fan blade off quite regular, you might find that the bearing starts to get a bit dry, so there's some bearing grease there just in case if you do need to reapply some grease. So pretty much thought of everything, I think, and it's going to be interesting seeing how these actually work in the real world and how useful this interchangeable fan blade is. So what we're going to do is get on with the build now. The plans for the system is to install a lot of these fans. I'm going to use a combination of the 120s and the 140s in this system in both pull and push, or intake and exhaust configuration. So let's get on with it and see how it works out. Thermaltake has very kindly sponsored this build, and as well as the SWA fans, we also have some other Thermaltake hardware to install into the system. The CPU cooler is going to be this Thermaltake Tough Liquid 360 ARGB sync, and I plan to remove the fans that come with this and replace those with the SWA fans. You'll see when I get on with the build whether which type of fan blade they've got installed, whether they're having a pull or push configuration. The power supplier is also Thermaltake, so this is the Tough Power PF1 ARGB 1200 watt, and I think this is an 80 plus platinum. Yep, so it's an 80 plus platinum power supply. I did have some grey and black sleeve cables that were supposed to be coming for this, but they've not arrived in time, so we'll just be using the standard cables that come with it. And it, as you can see, it's also an RGB power supply. Who doesn't want an RGB power supply these days? So there's an RGB fan in there, so that should maybe be visible with the case we got, because there's some mesh on the side of the case. So that's the power supply. The RAM is also Thermaltake RAM, so it's the TOUGHRAM XG RGB. We've got a bit of a tough theme going on with the Tough Liquid, the Tough Power and the Tough RAM. It's all a bit tough. So we've got actually 32 gigabytes in total, so these are actually two 16 gigabyte kits. So we'll have 4 8 gigabyte DIMMs in total, so all the DIMM slots will be populated, and you can see it's a DDR4 3600 megahertz kit. And the case is a bit of a beast. I didn't realise how big this case was. I've not built a system inside here before. This is the Thermaltake View 51 TG ARGB, I think it's called. And you can see there are some big 200mm fans, I think they are, in the front. They're going to be removed and replaced for some of the SWA 14, so the 140mm fans. I think I can fit 3 of those in the front, and I plan to install the AIO. I think I'm going to plan that, install that in the top with the fans blowing out, so as exhaust. And then there's also a side mount as well at the side of the motherboard, so I'm going to install another 3 fans in there as intake, I think. Oh, and on the floor as well, I think we can install another 3 fans on the floor, so I'm going to install those as well as intake. So it's a big old case, this. I've not built in it before, so I'm going to be interested to see what this is like to build inside. So let's get on with it. The build is complete. It took a little bit longer than I expected because I added a few more fans than I was going to originally. I'll just give you a recap on the hardware that we use. So the motherboard is a Gigabyte X570 Aorus Master. CPU is an AMD Ryzen 9 5900X. Graphics card for this system, we've used a Sapphire Toxic 6950 XT. So that's the one with the 360mm all-in-one CPU cooler attached to it. I've actually switched the Sapphire fans for the Thermaltake SWA fans. I'll talk about the fans in a minute. And then obviously memory I've already mentioned earlier is the Thermaltake TOUGHRAM. I've just installed a single M.2 SSD because this is just going to be a display system. It's the PNY XLR8 Gaming CS3040. It's a 1TB PCI-e Gen 4 drive. The rest of the stuff is the Thermaltake stuff that I mentioned, like the power supply, the fans, the case. Already spoke about those earlier. So the fans, I've actually ended up putting 16 fans in here in total. 340mm SWA fans. I removed the original fans that came with the case. Fitted the 140mm fans at the front, and they're as intake. Slightly restricted with this case. There's not much room for air behind that tempered glass panel. So I've also added another 320mm intakes at the bottom, and I had to switch the fan blades so they have the silver fan blades on and they're pulling cool air into the case from the bottom. And then, as I said, the graphics card radiator, I removed the stock Sapphire fans, installed 320mm SWA fans, and again I had to swap the fan blades over then. In the stock configuration, the fans come with the black label blades on, so they're in like the standard form that you'd normally expect a fan to arrive. So I had to switch those for the silver ones, and they're actually working also as an intake. I wasn't sure which would be better, whether to have those as an intake or an exhaust, because I've actually installed the graphics card radiator on the side mount at the side of the motherboard, but for now they're working as an intake. So they are probably pulling a bit of warm air into the system when the graphics card is run up. So I'm not sure which is better for that. I thought maybe if we ran it as an exhaust, so pushing the air out the side of the case, you may lose some of the front airflow. Some of the front airflow may just come in and be then exhausted straight out again, so it may restrict airflow across the motherboard. Not sure which is best, and as I say, this isn't a review as such, so I haven't gone into any real depth in testing airflow, and it is quite a restrictive case, as I said anyway. The CPU cooler again is a Thermaltake Tough Liquid. I removed the stock fans from that, replaced them with SWA fans. I've actually gone in a push-pull configuration. They have the black label fans on the inside, so they're pushing the air up, and then on the top they're the silver label fans, so again they're helping move the air in the same direction. Again, there's quite a small gap between the tempered glass and the fans, and there's not much of a gap at the side for airflow, so I'm not expecting any amazing results in terms of thermal performance. And then the last fan that I put in the system was at the back, so I just replaced the standard fan that comes in this View 51 case with an SWA fan, and that's with the black label on, and it's exhausting the air out of the back of the system. So I wouldn't say that these SWA fans make it any quicker to build a system. If anything, you probably have to think a little bit more about which fan blades you need on which fans, rather than just flipping the fans round for intake or exhaust, and also swapping the fan blades over. That obviously adds a bit more time to the build as well, but they're all about the aesthetics, these fans, and they do look great. I'd probably compare the RGB lighting effects to something like the Corsair ML or QL fans, which are, brilliant RGB lighting effects. And like I said, they're all about the aesthetics, and having them so that you can switch these fan blades over, it does improve the aesthetics to a certain extent, because you don't see the ugly back part of the fan frame or that label with the specifications on. There is one exception to that rule, and that's at these front fans. So with these front fans installed behind this tempered glass panel, you want to see the front of the fan from the front of the case, which means you have to have them with the black label facing outwards and working as an intake. The problem with that is from the inside of the case you can still see the framework of the fan. So I suppose one way to get around that would be to put a radiator at the front and have some front fans with the black label on, pulling air in, and then have a push-pull configuration on that radiator, so you've got some other fans on the back that you can see with the silver label on, on the other side. So it's not so much of a letdown, it is just a slight limitation with the fans. Another thing that wound me up a bit whilst I was building the system is the RGB controllers that come with the fans. They only have 5 ports on them for some reason, and I find that a bit strange to understand when you're probably going to be using these fans on radiators, so you're going to be using them in either multiples of 2 or 3. So I think it would have been better if these controllers had 6 ports on them. If they would have had 6 ports on them, I would have been able to use one less controller as well, which meant less wiring and less Molex connections and things like that. So I don't understand why they only have 5 ports. They really need 6 ports on those. You do have to use the software to control the fan, so it's the TT RGB Plus software. In here you can look at PC information, you can see temperatures of your CPU, GPU, and you can also adjust the fan speeds. And obviously the lighting can be adjusted on here as well. At the moment I've got it in this default wave pattern, so once you install the fans, install the TT RGB Plus software, this is the lighting effect that will come up as default. You can obviously change it to different patterns and you can combine different colours, or probably what I would do if I was using this system for myself or using these fans for myself, I would probably run them in a static colour. But you've got all sorts of configuration in the TT RGB Plus software. You can also adjust other Thermaltake RGB lighting. As you can see, we can adjust the RAM RGB lighting there as well. I know I've said that this is not a review as such, but I do want to have a quick look at the thermal performance, because there's no point saying that these fans are any good if they don't keep the system cool. The problem we are dealing with here, obviously, is this is quite a restrictive case with the tempered glass on the front and on the top. But we're going to run some thermal tests anyway. So I've been running the 3D Mark Timelapse Extreme stress test and the Cinebench R23 stress test all in a loop simultaneously for 30 minutes. All the system fans, so the front fans and the rear fan and the floor fans, they're set to about 800 RPM and they're set to a static RPM. And then the top fans on the CPU radiator, they're all set to about 1100 RPM, and that's the same for the fans on the graphics card radiator. And during the thermal test, the case is in its default configuration, so all the side panels are installed. So in this configuration, both the CPU and GPU peak and stable temperature after 30 minutes was in the mid 70s, so around 75 to 76 degrees C. Noise output from the system in that configuration was 40 decibels. So in that configuration, the system runs nice and quiet, but there is more performance in terms of thermals to be had by increasing fan speed. So I then ran the same test with the 3D Mark Timelapse Extreme and the Cinebench R23 benchmarks running simultaneously for another 30 minutes, but then I increased the fan speeds on the CPU cooler and the GPU to their maximum RPM, which is around about 2000 RPM. As you can see, running the fans at their maximum RPM on the CPU and GPU radiators did have a significant effect on the thermal performance. It brought the CPU and GPU temperature down to the low to mid 60s, but noise output with those fans increased raised to over 50 decibels, which is quite loud, and it will be quite distracting for some people. Maybe if you're using this as a gaming system and you've got headphones on, it might not be such a big deal. And also I'd say in a higher airflow case, I think you'd be able to get away with running the fans at a much lower RPM like I had in the first test. But like I say, with this case, you are struggling a bit with the restriction of airflow, but you have to say it does display these fans really well. I do like this idea of these interchangeable fan blades. It doesn't decrease the time it takes to initially build the system. I can imagine that if you do need to flip a fan from intake to exhaust, once you've got a system built up, it probably is quicker to just switch the fan blades over rather than having to unscrew the fan, potentially remove other bits of hardware to flip the fan around. And in terms of the aesthetics, it looks great as well. They all look like they're in the same orientation, but you can have the airflow in exhaust or in an intake without having to see that ugly backside of the fan. So that's a real benefit. I would like to see 6 ports on those RGB controllers. There is quite a lot of wiring involved with these fans because you can't just connect them directly to the motherboard. But saying that, with 16 fans of any type, you'd have quite a lot of wiring. So I quite like these fans. I definitely like how they look, and I think the thermal performance would be comparable to other, decent fans on the market once you use a better airflow case. So thanks for watching the Thermaltake SWA fan build. Let us know what you think of the build in the comment section. Also, let us know what you think of these new SWA fans. Are you thinking of buying some for yourself? If you've enjoyed watching this video, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. And if you like the content we provide here at Kit Guru and you want to support us, head over to our store and pick up some merch, or you could even subscribe to our Patreon. And as always, if you want to catch up on all the in-depth technical reviews, head over to the website.